Good morning, students. Today we are going to start a new chapter from the book Snapshot, and this is chapter number 7, and the page number is 65. Now, the name of the chapter is Birth, and this is written by A.J. Cronin. And in this excerpt from The Citadel, Andrew Manson, newly out of medical school, has just begun his medical practice as an assistant to Dr. Edward Page in the small Welsh mining town of Blanley. And as he is returning from a disappointing evening with Christine, the girl he loves, he is met by Joe Morgan. Joe and his wife, who have been married nearly 20 years, are expecting their first child. Now, what is this story is all about? This is a very nice story where a couple whose you can say the name of the man is Joe Morgan and his wife, they actually were expecting their first child in last 20 years, and that is why this Joe, because his wife was pregnant and she was expecting the baby soon, she needed some help to be, you can say, given by a doctor. So he actually went to Dr. Andrew Manson, who was a medical practitioner, and Joe actually wanted to go and take Andrew Manson with him. And these people, they actually were living in a town of Blanley. Now, what actually happened? Though it was nearly midnight when Andrew reached Bringover, he found Joe Morgan waiting for him. Now, what happened? Andrew Manson, who was the doctor, he actually reached his home back after his practice or after doing a lot of hard work throughout the day. He went back to his place, and when he reached Bringover, he found that Joe Morgan, who was a driller, who was a laborer, he was waiting outside his house or outside his surgery, walking up and down with short steps. Why he was walking up and down? Because he was very worried. Joe Morgan was very worried about his wife, and that is why he was walking here and there, just outside Andrew Manson's house, between the closed surgery and entrance to the house. At the sight of him, the burly driller. Now, what is the meaning of burly here? Burly means a heavy, big, strong man. So, a very strong driller's face expressed relief. Means when this driller, this laborer, noticed that the doctor had come, he felt very relieved. He felt relief. Oh, doctor, I am glad to see you. I've been back and forward here for this last hour. The missus wants you before time to. The missus wants you before time to means that his wife actually wanted a doctor, and she was, maybe you can say, expecting a baby before time, before 9 months. Maybe it was the eighth month. So he also told the doctor that he was really glad to see him, and he was waiting for him for last an hour. Andrew abruptly recalled from the contemplation of his own affairs, told Morgan to wait. Now, this is very important. Andrew means this doctor, Andrew Manson, he actually was very, you can say, upset, and he was confused, and he was going through a lot of things in his mind. And these contemplation means deep thinking. So he was thinking deeply about his own affairs means about his personal things. Something personal had he had gone through, and he was just thinking about himself. Told Morgan to wait, and he asked Joe Morgan to wait outside. He went into the house for his bag. Then together they set out for number 12 Blaine Terrace. Now, this is the address of this man. Joe Morgan's driller's house was actually at number 12 Blaine Terrace, and these two people, they set out. Set out means they started their journey towards this house. The night air was cool and deep with quiet mystery. Means it was a very silent night. It was, you can say, a cool breeze was blowing outside, and it was full of quietness, silence. Usually so perceptive, Andrew now felt dull and listless. Now, this line is very important. Why? Because this shows that Andrew means the doctor, Andrew Manson. He generally was a very perceptive man. Perceptive means he was very clear in his perception, in his point of view. But that day he was very sad. He was very dull and listless. Listless means he looked like lifeless. He had no premonition. Now, this word is very important. What is the meaning of premonition? Premonition means anticipation of evil. And anticipation here means पूर्वाभास जिसको हम बोलते हैं. He actually felt that something wrong was going to happen, or maybe he actually had this premonition, he had this anticipation that this night call would prove unusual. Still less that it would influence his whole future in Blenley. What is the meaning? That he had no idea, he had no premonition that this night call means the case which he was going to handle that night was going to change his future in Blenley. He did not know. He did not have any kind of anticipation that the case he was going to handle that day was going to change his life, his future, his career. The two men walked in silence until they reached the door of number 12. Then Joe drew up short. Now, what actually happened? The two men, these two people, Doctor and Joe Morgan, they entered a house. Means they walked in silence and they reached the door of number 2, and they reached this address, number 12 Bland Terrace. And then Joe drew up short. What is the meaning of drew up short? Drew up short means he actually stopped himself. Why? Because Joe himself was not ready to go into his own house. वो अपने घर नहीं जाना चाहता. Why? Because he could not see his wife in trouble, because she was going through a lot of pain and he could not see this. I will not come, he said, and his voice showed signs of strain. What is the meaning of signs of strain? Means he was very upset, he was very worried, and because he was so worried, he could not see his wife in pain and he did not want to go inside. But he said, I know you will do well for us. Now, this line is very important because according to the husband, according to Joe Morgan, he had full belief in the doctor. He knew that doctor is going to make everything right. He is going to do everything correctly. And he had a lot of belief in him. Now, page number 66. Inside, a narrow stair led up to a small bedroom, clean but poorly furnished and lit only by an oil lamp. Here, Mrs. Morgan's mother, a tall, grey-haired woman of nearly 70, and the stout elderly midwife waited beside the patient, watching Andrew's expression as he moved about the room. What actually happened? Now, these two people, they went accompanied with each other to 12 Bland Terrace. But Joe Morgan, he was the husband and he was not ready to see his wife inside the house in pain. So he drew himself outside only, and he asked the doctor to go inside, and he also showed his full interest, his full belief in him. And when this doctor, Andrew Manson, when he entered the house, he noticed that there was a narrow stair which actually led him to a very small bedroom. It was clean but poorly furnished. It shows that these people, they actually kept their house clean, but it was a small bedroom. The house was small, but it was neat and clean, it was tidy. And these people were actually living in a house which was poorly furnished. Poorly furnished means poorly equipped. All the things were not available. They were not having all the facilities, but it was quite a nice house and it was a small room. and lit only by an oil lamp. Means there was an oil lamp that was providing light to the room. And here, Mrs. Morgan's mother, a tall, grey haired woman of nearly 70, and the stout elderly midwife waited. Now, when he entered the room, he found that there were ladies, already two ladies who were waiting for the doctor. Number one is Mrs. Morgan's mother. Mrs. Morgan's mother means Joe Morgan's wife was Susan Morgan, and Susan Morgan's mother was actually, you can say, already present inside the house, inside the room. And when doctor entered the room, he found that there were two ladies. Number one, Mrs. Morgan's mother, means the pregnant lady's mother, and there was another lady who was the elderly midwife. Elderly midwife means, मिडवाइफ जनरली मीन्स यू कैन से नर्स, जिसको हम हिंदी में अपनी भाषा में दाई बोलते हैं. सो देयर वॉज अ मिडवाइफ ऑल्सो, देयर वॉज अ दाई, एंड शी ऑल्सो वॉज वेटिंग फॉर द डॉक्टर. सो देयर वर टू लेडीज प्रेजेंट. वन वॉज मिसेज मॉर्गन्स मदर एंड द सेकेंड वॉज elderly midwife. And this Mrs. Morgan's mother was a tall, gray haired woman, and she was nearly 70 years old. And there was another lady who was the midwife, who was the nurse, and this midwife was very stout. Stout means she was very strong, healthy, and she was also waiting beside the patient. These two ladies were beside the patient, means beside the pregnant lady, beside Mrs. Morgan, sorry, Mrs. Susan Morgan, and watching Andrew's expression as he moved about the room. "Let me make a cup of tea, doctor," said the former quickly after a few moments. Means this was said by the former. Former here means Mrs. Morgan's mother. So Mrs. Morgan's mother actually offered a cup of tea to the doctor. Why? This is very important, that why she was asking for a cup of tea to doctor, because she realized something. She is very experienced, and she knew that doctor would be required to help this pregnant lady, but she knew that it would take a lot of time. She knew that the doctor had to wait, and that is why she actually was going through some formalities. She just wanted to offer a cup of tea to the doctor. Andrew smiled faintly. He saw that the old woman, wise in experience, realized that there must be a period of waiting, that she was afraid he would leave the case, saying he would return later. And she understood. And doctor now understood. Doctor knew that the old woman, means Susan's mother, Mrs. Morgan's mother, was very wise in experience. She was very intelligent, and she knew, she realized that there was a period of waiting. She knew that the doctor had to wait for some time, maybe for some hours, and that is why she actually wanted to offer a cup of tea to the doctor, because she knew that maybe doctor would come to know that he would have to wait for some hours, and maybe he would go back home, and would ask them to call him when he would be required. But she did not want this. She wanted that the doctor should stay. "Don't fret, mother, I'll not run away." Now this is very important line, because doctor said this to Mrs. Morgan's mother, and he told her that she should not be worried. Now fret here means she should not be worried. Don't fret means don't get worried, don't get unhappy. "Mother, I will not run away," means I am not going anywhere, I am going to stay here. Down in the kitchen, he drank the tea which she gave him, overwrought as he was. Means now then he went downstairs, he sat in the kitchen, and he was given a cup of tea by that old woman, and overwrought as he was. Overwrought means he was overtired, he was really overexcited, he was over exhausted. He knew he could not snatch even an hour's sleep if he went home, and he knew that even if he would get a chance to go back home, maybe anytime he would be required by the pregnant lady because she was in pain. So he could not go back home. He wanted to stay in Joe Morgan's house only because he did not want them to get troubled. He knew that the case here would demand his full attention, and a queer lethargy of spirit came upon him. Now, this is very important word, lethargy. What is the meaning of lethargy? Lethargy means overexhaustion or maybe laziness. So he was actually facing a lot of trouble in sitting, and because he was overtired, over exhausted throughout the day, he decided to remain until everything was over. But at last, he decided that he would not go back home because the lady would demand his full attention anytime. So he could not go back home because the lady was pregnant and she was going to give birth to a baby soon. The doctor could not go for any, you can say, time now. An hour later, he went upstairs again, noted the progress made, came down once more. Means after some time, after half an hour, after taking the tea, he went upstairs and he again checked the progress, again checked the condition of the woman, and then came back downstairs again. He again went back down, sat by the kitchen fire, and he sat just by. By means just near the kitchen fire. Near the kitchen fire, he sat again. It was still except for the rustle of a cinder in the grate and the slow tick tock of the wall clock. What is the meaning? It was still. It was still means everything was silent. It was still means everything was silent except for the rustle of a cinder. Rustle of a cinder means cinder generally means coal, because there was some coal that was burning in the grate, grate, and grate here means angithi, fireplace. In the fireplace there was some cinder, some coal that was being burnt. So because it was being burnt, it was creating a kind of rustle here means a sound. तो कड़कड़ाहट जिसको बोलते हैं, क्योंकि when the coal was burning it was creating some noise. So there was only, you can say, there were only two noises, two things which could be heard in the silence of the you can say of night. Number one was the rustling, the burning of the coal in the grate. Grate means in the fireplace, and the slow tick tock of the wall clock. And the wall clock was ticking and talking, means wall clock was making a sound because its second hand was moving. So only these two things were to be heard, otherwise it was a very silent night. There was silence. No, there was another sound, the beat of Morgan's footsteps. But he said, no, not only these two things were to be heard, but there was another thing that actually was to be heard, and that was Morgan's footstep. Who is Morgan? Joe Morgan, the husband. He was waiting outside the house and he was going down and up. He was actually moving outside the house because he was worried. The old woman opposite him sat in her black dress, quite motionless, her eyes strangely alive and wise, probing, never leaving his face. And just opposite him, he actually was accompanied by the woman who was Susan's mother. Mrs. Morgan's mother was sitting just opposite to the doctor, and she was quite motionless. She was not doing anything, but she was keeping an eye on the doctor. And she just wanted to, you can say, see, she wanted to read the facial expressions of the doctor, because she wanted to know what was the condition of Susan or Mrs. Morgan or her daughter. So she was looking very strangely and wisely at the doctor, and she was trying to probe. What is the meaning of probing? Probing means she was trying to check, she was verifying, she was looking very cautiously, carefully at the doctor's face, never leaving his face. Means she was trying to read the facial expressions of the doctor. She wanted to know what was the condition of Susan. His thoughts were heavy, muddled, but doctor was actually not having Susan's thoughts in his mind. He was actually confused about a lot of things in his personal life. And muddled here means he was totally confused, mixed up. So his thoughts were heavy. He was muddled, he was confused. Why? The episode he had witnessed at Cardiff station still obsessed him morbidly. Morbidly means very sadly. Morbidly means sadly. So, what actually happened? He had a very bad meeting with somebody at Cardiff station. There was a Cardiff station, a railway station, where he had witnessed a very bad moment. Means he had something happened in his personal life that was troubling him. कुछ उसकी personal life में हुआ था जो उसको trouble कर रहा था. He thought of Bramwell, foolishly devoted to a woman who deceived him sordidly, of Edward Page, bound to the shrewish blood one, of Danny, living unhappily apart from his wife. Now, he was just thinking about some of the people who were not happy even after getting married. So, this Andrew Manson, the doctor, he was actually having a lot of thoughts in his mind about the weddings, about the marriages which were unsuccessful, or maybe about the some other relationships between some women or and some men. He thought of Bramwell. Now he was thinking about a man whose name was Bramwell. So he was thinking that Bramwell, he was foolishly devoted to a woman. He was actually following. He was really, you can say, he really loved a woman with so much devotion. But this woman, his beloved, she actually deceived. Deceived means she cheated. She cheated him sordidly. Sordidly means very meanly, very immorally. Means Bramwell was foolishly devoted. He devoted himself to a woman, and after devoting himself, after following this woman, he was deceived and cheated very sordidly, very meanly by that lady of Edward Page, bound to the shrewish blood one, of Danny, living unhappily. And then he also thought of Danny living unhappily apart from his wife. Then he thought about another man. First of all, he thought about this man Bramwell, and then he also had the example of Danny. Who these people, they actually were not able to live a happy life with their ladies. This Bramwell, he actually loved a woman with his heart, with full feelings, but he was cheated by that girl, by that woman. And Danny, who was actually living unhappily apart from his wife. Apart means away from his wife. They could not have, you can say, a very good relationship after marrying each other. His reason told him that all these marriages were dismal failures. Now, this line is very important because his reason here means his mind. Matlab, doctor's mind was telling him that these marriages were actually failures, and dismal means very sad failures. And he knew that these relationships were disappointing. It was a conclusion which, in his present state, made him wince. Made him wince means, what is the meaning of made him wince? Made him wince means he was stressed and he actually was hesitating. Expression of pain or hesitation is called as made him wince. So he was actually not able to understand. He was in confusion whether to get married, whether to have a good relationship with a woman or not. It was a conclusion in his present state which made him wince. He wished to consider marriage as an idyllic state. Now, what is the meaning of idyllic state? Idyllic means peaceful and fascinating. So he actually thought that, what is the meaning of marriage? He thought that marriage was an idyllic state, means it was a peaceful state. He could not otherwise consider it with the image of Christine before him. But when he was thinking about this woman, Christine, who was his beloved, he was thinking about his beloved, his girlfriend, whose name was Christine, and now he thought that maybe marriage was not a peaceful state. Her eyes shining towards him admitted no other conclusion. But now he started thinking about Christine, and he noticed that how her eyes would be shining. It was the conflict between his level, doubting mind, and his overflowing heart which left him resentful and confused. Now, he was totally confused because when he was thinking about Christine, he got attracted to get married. But when he was thinking about the people who had very bad and unsuccessful failed relationships with many women, then he was actually dragging himself away from marrying. Now, on the one hand, he wanted to marry Christine. On the other hand, he had very bad examples of the people who had very bad relationships with these ladies, whom they got married, or maybe with whom they couldn't get married. So it was a conflict. Conflict here means he was in a confusion. So this was a conflict. This was a dilemma. This was a confusion between his level, doubting mind, and his overflowing heart. Means on the one hand, he was actually trying to clear his doubts, means there were so many doubts in his mind, and on the other hand, there were so many feelings which were coming out of his heart. So these things, these confusions actually made him resentful. Resentful means angry, and confused. So he became resentful, means angry, and he was confused, means he was muddled. He did not know how to, you can say, get the resolution, how to solve this issue. He let his chin sink upon his chest, stretched out his legs, stared broodingly into the fire. Now, what happened? He let his chin sink upon his chest. So, what happened? He actually sat very sadly by keeping his chin on his nest and stretched out his legs. He stretched his legs, stared broodingly into the fire. Broodingly means very carefully. He was very sadly and with full attention. He was broodingly, means he was thinking very deeply and looking into the fire. He remained like this so long, and his thoughts were so filled with Christine that he stared when the old woman opposite suddenly addressed him. Her meditation had pursued a different course. Now, what actually happened? He remained like this so long, means he was sitting just in front of the kitchen fire, and he lost himself in the thoughts. When the old woman, who is this old woman? Old woman is that pregnant lady's mother, means Mrs. Morgan's mother. She actually called and she addressed him. She called his name. She wanted his attention, and she called the doctor. Her meditation had pursued a different course, and she was actually thinking about her daughter and maybe the child who was inside her womb, who was going to take birth soon. Today we are going to stop here only. This is the end of page number 66. Tomorrow we are going to continue with this. Thank you very much. Stay back home, stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you.